This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this Best of Bob Lowry, Bob Lowry is going to go over some products that you can add to your pool, or that, when added to the pool, I should say, zero out the chlorine level. And these are things that you should be aware of, what products actually affect the chlorine and can, of course, zero out the chlorine in the pool. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. For me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. So let's talk about zero chlorine in the water. Recently, and I've done this myself, where you add a chemical that's going to remove a stain or a sequestering agent, and basically the chlorine zeroes out in the pool. It takes, they can't recognize the fact that you're putting in this kind of thing, and so it oxidizes and all the chlorine's gone in the pool. And one thing is that you go back the next week, you put chlorine, and the same thing happens again. So is there a way to tell a breaking point when you put in one of these stain remover chemicals and it zeroes out the chlorine? When is it going to hold chlorine again, I should say? Or how do you get it to hold chlorine again because you don't want to shock the pool when you put a sequestering in?
I think it goes beyond or to a step before that. And that is your selection of a sequestering agent or a stain remover. And many of the stain removers use a chemical that is oxidizable by chlorine. And so when you put it in, and especially because some people have the idea that if this amount is good, adding a little more is probably better. So they put in 1.5 or 2 times what the bottle says. And so they put some in, and then they try to chlorinate after that. Well, they just put something in that needs to be oxidized, and now they're putting in an oxidizer. The two just are not compatible. Once the sequestering agent has filled up with metal, if you will, then the chlorine can go around free, because sequestering agent and the metal are kind of bonded together and holding on to one another, so chlorine doesn't have to act on them too much. But there are different versions of sequestering agents, and some are triethanolamines, some are phosphonates, some are other kinds of orthophosphorus compounds. You can create an algae problem because the orthophosphate and phosphonate products degrade into phosphates. And now you've got a pool full of phosphates, which algae love as their primary source of nutrition. So you put the stain remover in to get rid of the stain, and you end up with maybe an algae problem. And invariably, this is what happens: is you put a stain remover in, you start growing algae, but you haven't seen the algae yet. So regular amounts of chlorine get consumed trying to kill the algae. It may or may not be the oxidizer demand of the sequestering agent. It may be the fact that you've actually started growing some algae, and the algae is creating the chlorine demand. And algae can be growing for a while before you actually see it. Mm-hmm. You don't actually see that dense green color or black color or blue-green color until it's actually colonized a little bit and has grown for a while. So that may be the reason.
It's a very difficult situation for the pool pro when they're treating a stain or treating metals. And the person that called me kept going back week after week. He didn't really want to shock it because it was a new plaster and it was just a stain on there he was trying to get off of. Is there a way to, counter, like how would you know when the pool's not going to be zeroing out every week? Is there some way to calculate this particular effect when you put something in the pool? Not just the stain removers, but other products also I've seen.
Well, the manufacturers are supposed to put on the label, or they should put on the label that their products are incompatible with anything. I'm a little more of a believer when it comes to stains in removing the metal and not just sequestering it. And I think that service techs and homeowners and a lot of people make a mistake thinking that a sequestering agent removes the metal from the water. And that doesn't happen. What it does is a sequestering agent has a unique shape as a molecule. It can surround molecules of metal so that the metal can combine with anything else and cause a stain or precipitate. So it just surrounds that metal molecule and it keeps it from combining with anything. Well, the sequestering agent is organic, man-made, and because it's man-made, it gets degraded by sunlight, oxidizers, chlorine, ozone, and so on. It gets oxidized. And when it gets oxidized, it breaks down. And eventually it breaks down and leaves the metal again to be able to cause a stain. Mm-hmm. So the metal is still in the pool. It's not gone. And when the sequestering agent breaks down, the metal is free to cause a stain. We need a way to actually get rid of the metal. And there's, at present, only one company that makes a device that will do that. And it's in a little bag or a little cage that you can put in your skimmer. And you put it in the skimmer and water flows through your skimmer. And as it does, this little bag grabs onto the metals and keeps it in that bag. And the metal that was in the water is gone.
Yeah, and that's the Sea Later product. I can mention them because I'm good friends with them over there, and I know that product works well.
I know them very well, and they're great people. Yeah. And as you know, I don't mention brand names.
I know, but I can throw that out because people are going to be wondering what that is. So it's a See You Later 4.0 or 1.0. And then another way chlorine zeroed out a lot is the pool pro will put a lot of sodium bromide in the pool. They're treating algae, and they're using an algae product with that in there. And then they zero out the chlorine that way too. What are the dangers of using that product in the pool over and over again? And you're going to be getting zero chlorine readings a lot when you overdo it.
Well, you may or may not get a zero reading, but here's what happens if you use a sodium bromide based algicide, and there are many of them on there. But bear in mind that any algae product has to say on the label the ingredient. So you need to read the label a little bit and see if it says sodium bromide. And if it says sodium bromide, when you put that in the pool, you have now changed the pool to a bromine pool. And it may be good for getting rid of algae because hypobromous acid is a little better at killing algae than chlorine is. So, and it's also something that the algae is not used to. You have to remember that you've been keeping chlorine in the pool and the algae grew with the chlorine in it. So it's kind of used to chlorine. So when it sees bromine, it's not used to it. So bromine makes it pretty effective. So it's an effective algicide, but any amount of bromide left in the water, when you add chlorine to the pool, that bromide gets activated by chlorine into the killing form of bromine called hyperbromous acid. And then when the hyperbromous acid kills something, it reverts back to bromide. And then when you add more chlorine, it reactivates the bromine. So all the chlorine that you put in the pool is reactivating the bromide. and it's not going away. And especially if you use the I ran the dose on a couple of the bromide-based algicides, and when you put that in, you're actually putting about 3 parts per million bromide into the water. And what that means is every time you add 3 parts per million of chlorine, the chlorine is all used in making bromine in the pool. And so you're not making chlorine anymore. And there's problems with that because you're looking at your test kit thinking you've got 3 parts per million of chlorine when you've actually got 3 parts per million of bromine. And bromine, we recommend a level of 4 to 6 parts per million of bromine in the pool, not 2 to 4. So you need twice as much of it. And your test kit thinks it's measuring chlorine and it's measuring bromine. And the other thing that happens is bromine can be degraded by sunlight. So the cyanuric acid that's in your pool isn't protecting the bromine. And as a result, you go through a lot of chlorine because you're creating bromine. Sunlight is killing off the bromine that's in the pool at a rate of 65% in 2 hours. And that means in about 5 hours, you zero out the chlorine. And there's no way to stop it. The cyanuric acid isn't doing anything for it. So you'd be using a huge amount of chlorine in the pool and wondering why. If you used a bromine-based product and you've used very much of it, the only way to get rid of the bromide is to drain most of the water out of the pool. There's no other solution. There's no way to precipitate it. I've heard sales reps from the companies that make these algicides, and they say it's not a problem. And I'm telling you, it is a problem. And you will be using huge amounts of chlorine in your pool. You can have stuff growing because you've only got actually half of the reading you think you do.
Yeah, so, whether the pool is zeroed out through a sequestering agent or a stain remover or through using too much sodium bromide, what would be the bottom line, the danger of a pool with zero chlorine? I know it's unsafe, but go over if you're doing this on your pool route or if a customer is doing this and they zero out the chlorine and then they want to use the pool, what would be the inherent danger of something like that?
It's the same thing I mentioned in another cast, is that the danger is that there's no residual in the water to prevent any bather-to-bather disease transmission. And this is important because you can get ear infections, eye infections, nose infections, throat infections, lung infections, a lot of things you can get from being in the water. And if you've got no residual, you got zero protection.
Mm-hmm.
And understand this, that it's possible to go to a negative demand, which means that you could you'll have to add an amount of chlorine just to get back to zero. And then after that, you will start to get a residual. But I've seen pools where we've added 5 pounds of shock to a pool and it disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And it disappeared because your test kit doesn't go negative, it only goes to zero.
Yeah.
So you don't know how much negative it is. You may have had a negative 10 parts per million.
Yeah, so that's the problem with using these things because they're very useful in the industry, but there are some cautions because of the side effects and having a pool with zero chlorine, and you can't shock it because then the metals will drop out of the solution again. So it's pretty tricky. It's a pretty tricky process, but I think one thing I think that we should put out there is that if you are using stain removers or sequestering agents, that the pool could be unsafe, right?
It's possible that if you use a sequestering agent, that you wipe out the chlorine, and who knows how long that means it's going to be with zero chlorine.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a service call and it's a 1 call a week, if it was the day after the guy showed up, you could be 6 days without chlorine.
Yeah,
that is a very long time to go with no chlorine.
Yeah, so I think that's something that people should be aware of when they're treating stuff like that there are side effects to that. So I think if you're new and you're using sequestering agents or any kind of stain remover, just be aware of the fact that these can and tend to zero out the chlorine level in a pool. And that's something that you're going to learn maybe the hard way if you're not too familiar with using these products. It's just one of the side effects that happens. And I hope you found it helpful going over some of the things to look out for when using these type of products in your pool, or sodium bromide, something of that nature. And what could happen is, of course, the chlorine level could zero out in the pool. And if you're looking for other episodes, you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. There'll be over 1,900 podcasts for you to download and listen to. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.